The morning began with the smell of gunpowder and stale coffee at the Fort Benning training base in Georgia. Diane Carter watched the new recruits gather on the firing range with that irritating confidence that only youth and ignorance could provide. She was 53 years old, with gray hair tied in a tight ponytail, and scars that told stories those boys could never imagine. Her hands, calloused by 2 decades in the Marine Corps, held the clipboard with the list of names of the new soldiers she was to evaluate that week. The recruits laughed amongst themselves, glancing in her direction. Diane recognized that kind of look. It was the same look she'd received in 1990 when she enlisted, and the men thought she was only there to fill a quota. It was the look that said she didn't belong there, that she was too old, too weak, too inadequate. One of the guys, a tall boy from Ohio named Bradley Peterson, with broad shoulders and a smug smile, whispered something to his colleagues that made them burst into laughter. Diane didn't need to hear the words to know they were about her. Sergeant Williams, a 40-year-old man whom Diane had known since he was just a private afraid of his own rifle, approached her with an apologetic expression on his face. He knew exactly what was going on. Diane just nodded slightly, indicating that everything was fine. She had dealt with worse than arrogant boys who thought they knew everything about war because they had played video games or watched action movies. The day's exercise was simple in theory, but brutal in execution. The recruits would have to hit targets at 200, 400, and 600 meters, under time pressure, with variable winds, and after a 3-kilometer run in full equipment. It was the kind of test that separated the true snipers from those who only pretended to be. Diane had designed the exercise personally, based on real situations she had faced in Fallujah and Helmand. Each element had a purpose. Each difficulty reflected the chaos of real combat. Bradley Peterson was the first to volunteer. Of course he was. Boys like him were always the first. He walked to the firing line with that exaggerated confidence, making sure to flex his muscles as he adjusted his rifle. His friends shouted words of encouragement, as if this were a college competition and not serious military training. Diane jotted something down on her clipboard, her face remaining completely neutral. She had learned, long ago, that the best response to arrogance was indifference. Bradley's shot was mediocre at best. He hit only 4 of the 12 targets, and even those were marginal hits that in real combat probably wouldn't have caused significant damage. When he finished, he was still smiling, as if that performance was something to be proud of. His colleagues patted him on the back, offering excuses about the wind and the distance, as if those were factors that didn't exist in real combat situations. Then, the betting began. Diane heard everything, even though she pretended not to be paying attention. Bradley was telling the others that he doubted the old instructor could do better than him. One of the other recruits, a girl from Dallas named Michelle, tried to defend her, mentioning that Diane Carter was a legend, that she had more medals than most of the senior officers. Bradley just laughed, saying that medals meant nothing now, that she was old, that her reflexes had certainly diminished, that she probably couldn't even hold a rifle properly anymore. Sergeant Williams turned red with anger. He stepped forward, ready to reprimand the recruits for their disrespect. But Diane placed a hand on his arm. She shook her head again, this time with a small smile on her lips. Williams knew her well enough to understand what that smile meant. He stepped back, crossed his arms, and waited. The other instructors present also sensed the change in the air. Something was about to happen. Diane handed the clipboard to Williams and walked over to the weapons rack. She chose a standard M4 rifle, the same model the recruits were using. Nothing special, nothing modified. She checked the weapon with movements so natural they resembled breathing, verifying each component with the precision of someone who had done it thousands of times. Her fingers knew every part of the rifle better than they knew her own face. In Fallujah, that weapon had been the difference between life and death so many times. She'd lost count. The recruits fell silent as she approached the firing line. Bradley still had that arrogant smile, but something within him wavered when he saw the way Diane held the rifle. There was an economy of movement in every gesture, an efficiency that came only from years of real-world experience. There was no unnecessary posture, no wasted movement. She was pure function, pure purpose. It was the difference between someone who learned to shoot in a drill room and someone who learned to shoot while people tried to kill her. Sergeant Williams announced the rules, his voice carrying a tone of anticipated satisfaction. Diane took her position. The wind was blowing from the southwest at approximately 15 kilometers per hour, varying slightly. She didn't need instruments to measure it. Her body had already processed the information automatically, adjusting her posture and aim mentally before even raising her rifle. In Helmand, there was no time to check wind gauges. You felt it, adjusted, and shot, or you died. The first target was 200 meters away. For most trained snipers, it was a comfortable distance. Diane took a deep breath, exhaled half her breath, and pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot echoed across the field. A second later, the target in the distance showed a perfect hole in the center of the mass. Not on the edge, not almost hitting, in the absolute center. The kind of shot that in real combat meant instant neutralization of the threat. Before the echo of the first shot had completely faded, she was already adjusting for the second target, 300 meters, slightly to the left. The wind had subtly shifted. Diane compensated without consciously thinking about it. Her brain and body had long since become a single machine. The second shot was as perfect as the first, then the third, then the fourth. Each shot was separated by only 3 or 4 seconds, each hitting exactly where it should. The training field was completely silent now. The recruits had stopped making any noise. Even Bradley Peterson had lost his smile. They were witnessing something they had never seen before. It wasn't just good aim. It was art. It was the difference between competence and mastery, between knowledge and wisdom, between youth and real experience. Diane moved toward the 400-meter targets. These were more difficult, especially with the changeable wind. Most recruits struggled to hit stationary targets at that distance, even in perfect conditions. Diane didn't hesitate. 5 targets, 5 shots, 5 perfect hits. Each bullet found its target with surgical precision. There was nothing lucky about it. It was pure skill honed by years of practice under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Finally, she adjusted for targets at 600 meters. This was the distance where even experienced snipers began to show inconsistency. At that distance, the wind, the curvature of the bullet, even the Earth's rotation began to make a difference. So many variables had to be calculated that most snipers simply couldn't process them all quickly enough. Diane had spent countless hours on rooftops in Fallujah, calculating these same variables while insurgents tried to locate her. She had learned to do these calculations faster than she consciously thought about them. The first target, 600 meters away, fell, then the second, the third. When she hit the 6th and final target in the sequence, she had completed the entire exercise with 12 out of 12 hits, each one hitting the center of mass. It was a performance that was beyond the capacity of most active shooters, let alone someone who was theoretically past their prime. Diane lowered her rifle and set it down safely with the same efficient movements she had used to pick it up. She turned to face the recruits. Her face was still calm, without any expression of triumph or arrogance. She didn't need to boast. The results spoke for themselves louder than any words could. Bradley Peterson was looking at the ground, his face red with embarrassment. The other recruits seemed to be in shock. Finally, Diane spoke. Her voice was low, but it carried weight. Each word had been carefully chosen, not to humiliate, but to educate. She said that competence had no expiration date, that experience wasn't something lost simply by getting older. She explained that the recruits had confused youth with skill, enthusiasm with ability. She reminded them that, in real combat, it didn't matter how old you were or how impressive you looked. What mattered was whether you could do the job when bullets were flying and the people you loved depended on you. She told them about Fallujah, about the night she had saved an entire patrol of Marines by making impossible shots from a rooftop, while insurgents surrounded her comrades. She didn't tell it with pride, but as a lesson. Each of those shots had been made under conditions 1,000 times worse than anything they would face in that training camp. She had made those shots knowing that if she missed, good men would die. That was the kind of pressure that forged true snipers, not comfortable training camps with instructors watching. The recruits listened in absolute silence. Michelle, the girl from Dallas who had tried to defend Diane earlier, had tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of something deeper. It was the recognition that she was in the presence of someone truly exceptional, someone who had done things she could only dream of doing. It was inspiration mixed with humility, the understanding that she still had so much to learn. Bradley Peterson finally found the courage to raise his eyes. When Diane looked at him, there was no anger in his gaze, only assessment. She could see what he was thinking, could see the arrogance beginning to crumble, replaced by something more valuable. Shame, yes, but also the beginning of true understanding. He had learned a lesson that no, book or lecture could teach. He had learned that underestimating someone based on appearances was not only disrespectful, but potentially fatal in real-life situations. Sergeant Williams took charge, ordering the recruits to continue with the training. They obeyed with a seriousness they hadn't shown before. The entire exercise had changed in nature. It was no longer just another boring training day. It was an opportunity to learn from someone who really knew what they were doing, someone who had been there and done it. The recruits applied themselves to the following exercises with renewed intensity, each trying to absorb whatever knowledge they could. Throughout the rest of the day, Diane observed them and offered corrections when necessary. Her approach was different now. The recruits truly listened when she spoke. Bradley especially paid attention to every word, making mental notes, trying to understand not only what she was saying, but why she was saying it. He had learned that every instruction she gave came from real experience, not textbook theory. At the end of the day, as the recruits were being dismissed, Bradley approached Diane. He hesitated for a moment before speaking, clearly choosing his words carefully. When he finally spoke, his voice was devoid of all previous arrogance. He apologized, not with the empty excuse of someone caught doing something wrong, but with the sincerity of someone who genuinely understood he had made a mistake. He admitted that he had underestimated her, that he had let his prejudices cloud his judgment. Diane accepted the apology with a nod. She said that everyone makes mistakes, that the important thing was to learn from them. She offered him and the other recruits the opportunity for additional training if they were interested. It wouldn't be easy, she warned. She would expect the same standard from them as she expected from herself, and that standard was extremely high. But if they were willing to work, to truly dedicate themselves, she would teach them everything she knew. Bradley accepted immediately, as did Michelle and several others. Over the next few weeks, they arrived early and stayed late, working with Diane on advanced shooting skills. She was a demanding but patient teacher, correcting tiny mistakes they didn't even know they were making, teaching techniques that had taken her years to master. She shared combat stories, not to brag, but to illustrate points about tactics and strategy. Slowly, the recruits began to improve, not only in their shooting skills, but in their overall attitude. They learned to respect experience, to value knowledge that came from real sources rather than just theory. Bradley, in particular, was transformed. The arrogant boy from Ohio disappeared, replaced by a serious and dedicated soldier who understood that he still had much to learn. Months later, when Bradley was being sent on his first overseas mission, he sought out Diane one last time. He thanked her, not only for the training, but for the lesson in humility. He said he would never forget the day he had bet against her, not because he had lost the bet, but because he had learned something fundamental about not judging people by appearances. Diane simply smiled and said that if he remembered that lesson, then her first shot had been worthwhile. The story of Diane Carter and the arrogant recruits spread throughout the base, then to other bases. It became one of those legends that instructors told new soldiers, a story about not underestimating veterans, about respecting experience, about the difference between genuine confidence and empty arrogance. Each time the story was told, the details changed slightly, but the essence remained the same. A veteran had been ridiculed by young recruits, and with a single perfect shooting exercise, she had silenced them all and taught them a lesson they would carry for the rest of their careers. Years after that memorable day at Fort Benning, Diane Carter had officially retired from active duty, but her legend continued to grow in military circles. She had accepted a position as an advanced training consultant, traveling between different bases to evaluate training programs and occasionally give practical demonstrations. Her reputation preceded her wherever she went, and the young instructors who now worked under her guidance treated her with the respect she had always deserved, but not always received. Bradley Peterson, now a decorated sergeant with 2 tours in Afghanistan under his belt, had become one of the Army's most respected marksmanship instructors. He carried with him the lessons Diane had taught him, not only about shooting technique, but about leadership and humility. Whenever he trained new recruits, he would tell the story of his first day under Diane's command, emphasizing his own arrogance and how he had been humiliated. He didn't tell the story to demean himself, but to teach the young soldiers that competence had no age limit and that judging someone by their appearance was a mistake that could cost lives in real combat. Michelle, the Dallas girl who had defended Diane that day, had followed a different but equally remarkable path. She had specialized in special operations and now led an elite unit that carried out precision missions in conflict zones. She credited Diane with shaping her leadership philosophy. During her most difficult missions, when the pressure was immense and decisions needed to be made in split seconds, Michelle remembered that morning at Fort Benning and the absolute calm Diane had demonstrated. It was this kind of control under pressure that she tried to emulate with her own troops. Diane's impact extended far beyond the individuals she had directly trained. Instructional programs at various military bases had been revamped based on her methods. She had helped develop new training protocols that emphasized not only technical skill, but also emotional maturity and respect for experience. Her reports on training effectiveness were required reading for senior officers, and her recommendations frequently became official policy. At a national military training conference in San Diego, Diane was invited as the keynote speaker. The auditorium was packed with instructors, officers, and training specialists from across the country. When she took the stage, there was a prolonged ovation. She waited patiently for the applause to subside, her face showing the same calm expression she always had. She wasn't the type to crave attention, but she understood that her position gave her a platform to effect real change. Her lecture wasn't about herself or her accomplishments. Instead, she spoke about the evolution of military training and the importance of adapting old methods to modern realities without losing the fundamental lessons that generations of soldiers had learned through blood and sacrifice. She emphasized that technology was important, that new equipment and tactics had their place, but that ultimately, wars were still won or lost based on the quality of the individuals who fought them. She recounted stories from her missions, not as exercises in nostalgia, but as case studies on decision-making under extreme pressure. Each story had a clear educational purpose. When she spoke about Fallujah, she didn't glorify the violence or the danger, but coldly analyzed the tactical decisions she had made and why they had worked. When she described situations in Helmand, she focused on the importance of knowing your capabilities and limitations, of working as part of a larger team, of never letting ego or pride compromise the mission. The most powerful moment of the lecture came when she directly addressed the issue of bias and underestimation in the military environment. She spoke openly about the decades of discrimination she had faced, not with bitterness, but with objective analysis of how it had affected not only her career, but overall military effectiveness. She argued that any organization that allowed bias to prevent qualified individuals from contributing fully was sabotaging itself. She used concrete data, case studies, and personal examples to build an irrefutable argument. When she finished, the ovation was even more enthusiastic than at the beginning. But what pleased her most were the conversations that followed. Young instructors, women who were facing the same challenges Diane had faced decades before, sought advice. She spent hours talking with them, offering not just empty encouragement, but practical strategies for navigating an environment still dominated by men. She was honest about the challenges, but optimistic about the future, noting how much things had changed even in the last few decades. Back at Fort Benning for a visit, Diane was received as a heroine. The base had established an annual award for excellence in marksmanship that bore her name, the Carter Excellence. Award was given to the recruit who demonstrated not only exceptional skill, but also the maturity and respect for experience that Diane represented. Bradley Peterson was frequently one of the judges, and he took the responsibility very seriously, always looking not just for the best shooter, but the one who showed the right character. During this visit, Diane asked to observe a regular training session. She wanted to see how the methods she had helped develop were being implemented in practice. What she saw deeply pleased her. The instructors were firm but respectful, demanding but fair. The recruits were taken seriously, their concerns heard, their abilities systematically developed. There was a culture of excellence that did not rely on humiliation or intimidation, but on clear standards and consistent support. After the session, she met with the instructors for an informal discussion. They asked questions about specific techniques, about how to deal with problematic recruits, about how to maintain motivation during repetitive training. Diane answered each question with the patience of someone who had seen and done it all. She didn't have all the answers, and she freely admitted this when that was the case. But her vast experience meant that she usually had at least one useful perspective to offer. One of the younger instructors, a newly graduated lieutenant from West Point, asked how she had dealt with self-doubt during her career. It was a surprisingly vulnerable question, coming from an officer, and the silence that followed showed that others also wanted to hear the answer. Diane thought carefully before responding. She admitted that she had had many moments of self-doubt, especially in the early years when it seemed she had to prove her worth every day. The difference, she explained, was that she had never let that self-doubt paralyze her actions. She felt the uncertainty. She acknowledged it, but then she did the work anyway. She also spoke about the importance of having mentors and allies. No one achieved success completely alone, she emphasized. Throughout her career, there had been people who believed in her when others doubted her, who gave her opportunities when others denied them, who defended her when others attacked her. Sergeant Williams had been one of those allies, and she specifically mentioned how his support had made a difference at critical moments. It was important, she said, not only to find those people, but also to be that kind of person for others. As the sun began to set over Fort Benning, Diane walked alone across the firing range where it had all happened years before. The place seemed smaller now somehow, less intimidating. She remembered that morning with crystal clarity. She could almost hear the laughter of the arrogant recruits. She could feel the weight of the rifle in her hands. She could see the targets falling one by one. It had been a defining moment, not only for those recruits but for herself as, well, it had been a reaffirmation that she still had what it took, that age was just a number when it came to true competence. Bradley found her there, guessing where she would be. They stood side by side for a moment, both gazing at the field where so much had changed years before. He finally broke the silence, saying that not a single day went by without him thinking about the lessons she had taught him. Not just about shooting, he clarified, but about character, about humility, about what it truly meant to be a soldier. Diane placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture of physical affection from her, and said that he had become exactly the kind of leader the Army needed. That evening, there was a dinner in her honor at the Officers Club. Veterans from different generations attended, some she had trained, others who simply knew of her reputation and wanted to meet her in person. Stories flowed freely, each person sharing how Diane had impacted their lives or careers. Michelle participated via video conference from an overseas base. Her presence on screen met with enthusiastic applause. She recounted her own version of that fateful day, emphasizing how witnessing that moment had shaped her own understanding of leadership. When it was Diane's turn to speak, she kept her words brief. She thanked everyone for coming, expressed genuine pride in the soldiers they had become, and reminded them that the true test of a leader was not their own competence, but the competence of those they trained. If she had made any difference, she said, it was because she had had the privilege of working with exceptional people who were willing to learn and grow. Their success was her greatest achievement, more valuable than any medal or recognition she had received. In the following months, Diane gradually reduced her consulting commitments, not because she was no longer capable, but because she felt it was time to pass the baton to the next generation. She had done her part, fought her battles both on the battlefields and in the training camps. The lessons she had taught were now embodied in the next generation of military leaders, perpetuated by people like Bradley and Michelle, who understood not only what she had taught, but why it mattered. Her last official day as a consultant was marked simply, exactly as she wanted. There was no grand ceremony or long speeches. She spent the day doing what she had always done, working with soldiers, refining techniques, sharing knowledge. At the end of the day, as she packed away her equipment for the last time, she felt a sense of quiet completion. She had given everything she had to military service, and military service had given her a purpose and meaning that would define the rest of her life. Diane Carter retired to a small house in the Tennessee mountains, but her influence continued to spread through the generations of soldiers she had touched. That first shot at Fort Benning had truly silenced everyone, but more importantly, had started conversations that are still ongoing about respect, competence, experience, and the true meaning of military excellence.